This video will show you how to replace the front sealed wheel bearing on a GMC Sierra 2500. This will be located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we have to do is safely raise and support the front end of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Once you've done that, if you have a hubcap, we're going to remove that. That can be done using a 22mm socket. After that, we'll remove all 8 of our 22mm lug nuts as well so we can remove the wheel. Now that we have the wheel off, let's have a close look in the center area here. We have a metal cover. We're going to dislodge this so we can make our way behind to our axle nut. For this, I'm just using a small hammerable pry bar. I want to make my way in between this area so I can separate it. There's our cover. Just a quick inspection of that. We'll set it aside. We're using a 36mm for our axle nut. There's that. Once you have removed the nut and its washer, continue on with a hammer and punch directly in the center of the front axle. I've used some penetrant to help break this free. Now, once you do have movement from the axle in comparison to the wheel bearing, we'll continue on. Now, up along the top of the knuckle, this is where we can see our ABS wheel speed sensor wire from the wheel bearing, and this is leading all the way up across the top of the upper control arm, and you're going to find it makes its way behind the front wheel well. Up along the top of the frame is where you're going to find an electrical connector. We're going to carefully dislodge it, then we're going to have to separate the electrical connector from the frame and continue on down along this way. Now, as I make my way up and along the top of the frame here, I can feel where my electrical connector is. I'm just carefully pulling up on my locking tab and I'm pressing the wiring harness away. Of course, a quick inspection along each end for corrosion is extremely important. Continuing on, we're going to separate the connector from the frame next. Gently pry it up and out of the frame. Now, sometimes the mounting point will break off. That's okay. We can try to remove that or use a wire tie as necessary. As we make our way down, we have another mounting point. Pry that out of place as well. Let's continue making our way outward up along the top of the control arm. We have another mounting point. I'm just going to use a small flat blade screwdriver for this. The locking tab is inside of this area, so I'm using a small screwdriver. We're just going to make our way in, gently pry to separate that. Inspection of that. This is looking good. Now we're just going to pry this off of this metal bracket. Let's set this cable aside. Right in the same area, we're going to dislodge the bracket, which is part of our brake flex hose. We have a 10mm mounting bolt. Quick inspection of that. Now the next thing we want to do is start removing our caliper from this area. If you are looking along the back side of the caliper, you're going to find that you have 2 bolts holding the caliper bracket to the knuckle. We're going to be using a 21mm for each of these. As for these bolts, let's fully remove the upper one. Just give it a quick inspection and start it back in a couple threads. With that started in a couple threads, we can fully remove the next mounting bolt. Now we're holding onto the caliper as we remove that mounting bolt. We should be able to slide this away from our brake rotor. Once you do have it pulled away from the brake rotor, pay attention to the brake pads, making sure they are still in good usable order. We're going to hang this aside, putting no pressure on our flex hose. Let's remove that brake rotor next. Let's make our way to the outer tie rod end next. You can see we have a 21mm mounting nut holding it in place to our steering knuckle. Once you've removed that mounting nut, just start it back on a couple threads. Go ahead and use a little penetrant here, and we'll continue on with a hammer. We're going to cause vibration directly on our knuckle. You can see the tie rod end drop down. Go ahead and remove that mounting nut, separate the tie rod end, give it a close inspection. Make sure it's still in good usable order, and we're setting that aside. At this point, we can pivot the steering knuckle as necessary. Now, as we make our way along the back side of the knuckle, this is where we can see 4 mounting bolts. We have 2 along one side and 2 along the other side of the knuckle. These 15mm headed mounting bolts are holding the wheel bearing to our steering knuckle. There's our first mounting bolt. It's my next mounting bolt. Now for this mounting bolt, since I intend on working the bolts from the backside here to drive out the wheel bearing, I'm starting in this lower bolt, just a few threads here. Now, of course, I do still have to make my way over to the other side, remove my other 2 mounting bolts, and I'm going to leave one on that side in a few threads as well. Now, as I mentioned, I have to drive the wheel bearing out from this side. I'm going to be using my air hammer with a specialty bit on the end of my bolt. I have them in several threads because I don't want to damage the bolts. We are going to be reusing them. Now we are getting some movement on this side. We'll use some penetrant, and then we'll make our way over to the other side. We're going to attempt to rock this bearing out of position. Now, if you don't have the specialty adapter to be able to hit on the backside of the bolts without causing any damage, there's other ways to remove the bearing. You can do it with a regular hammer and hit along this area, gently driving it out and away. You want to be extremely careful. Or you can continue on with an air hammer along this outer edge here. You'd want to start trying to spin this bearing. Once you have it broken free, typically the bearing will separate, and of course we can remove the backing plate at the same time. Either way you're planning on doing it, it's a good idea to remove the mounting bolts from the back side of the wheel bearing. We're going to install our axle nut a couple threads out here, and then we'll continue on. This is going to prevent the bearing from falling off and potentially hurting us while we continue on. I have my air hammer bit. Getting some good movement now. As you can tell, I do have it, so it's starting to spin. I've got my penetrant working its way in. I'm just going to continue on with my hammer. We're attempting to get this out and away from the knuckle. At this point, we can start removing that bearing. We have our axle nut in place, so we're going to remove that. We'll start removing the bearing and that backing plate. We can slide both of these off of here. Continuing on, we should be able to remove the backing plate from the bearing itself. Just a quick inspection of that, we'll set it aside. There it is, friend. Prior to installation of any brand new part, of course, we want to make sure we clean and inspect our mounting area. We want to inspect the knuckle itself. We have the outer portion that the bearing goes against, but you also have the inner portion, the circle here. We want to make sure we remove as much debris as possible. You can use a wire brush as necessary. We'll be careful for any sharp edges as we continue on. We have that cleaned. Now let's just inspect the rubber seal that you can see inside this circular port. We want to make sure it's still in good usable order. After we've cleaned everything, let's continue on with anti-seize. And then I also like to use anti-seize inside the circular port. Let's go right along the edge there. After you get inside of the circular port, we're going to go along the outer edge area. The next thing we'll do is clean and inspect all 4 of our wheel bearing mounting bolts. I've cleaned the threads and applied some blue thread locker. Let's install our backing plate. Once you have that in place and the proper orientation, it's time to install the wheel bearing. As for that wheel bearing, we're taking it and we're sliding it towards the backing plate and our steering knuckle. It's sliding onto the axle. As far as the bearing's concerned, we want to make sure we have that in the proper orientation as well. The ABS wheel speed sensor wire would be up along the top of the bearing. It slides into this port here. Once you have everything lined up, let's continue on along the back side with our 4 mounting bolts. That's 2. Let's do the same on the other side. I have all the bolts started in. Now we're going to snug these up in a crisscross manner. After that, we'll be torquing each of them to 133 foot-pounds. As for torquing these bolts, once you have the bearing completely bottomed out, you can continue on torquing them in a circular manner if necessary. There's our first 2. Let's do the same on the other side. The next thing we need to do is attach the outer tie rod end to our steering knuckle. Go ahead and press that up into position and we'll start on our mounting nut. Once you have that started on, snug it up and torque it to 44 foot-pounds. There we are. We'll use some copper anti-seize on the hub mating surface. Now it's time for the brake rotor. To hold this in position, I'm using my axle nut as a spacer and my lug nut to hold it on there. Before we bring the caliper into position, let's make sure we have the ABS wheel speed sensor wire in the proper positioning. We don't want it down here where it could get damaged by our caliper. We're going to bring it right up along the top of this area, just behind the backing plate. We'll rest it in this area. Continue on with your caliper. As for that caliper, we're going to bring it over the brake rotor. We'll slide it into place, start in each one of our 2 mounting bolts. Now before I get my bolts in place, let's just have a quick look at our brake flex hose. What we're paying attention to is to confirm it's not twisted in some way that might restrict the brake fluid flow. This could happen if you are bringing the caliper over and you turned it in some way. Now it's time for our 2 caliper bracket mounting bolts. I've cleaned the threads. Let's continue on with installing these. We're going to torque them to 229 foot-pounds. With the caliper in position, the brake rotor can't go anywhere. We can remove the lug nut and our spacer. Let's pay attention to our brake flex hose next. Up along the top of the steering knuckle, you can tell that the brake flex hose bracket has a small alignment tab, and then of course we have a port on the knuckle and on that bracket for our mounting bolt. We'll just start in our mounting bolt and snug it up. It's time to secure that ABS wire next. We'll slide that into its locking clip. Make our way over here now. You can see exactly where it needs to fit into. Press that in. Let's make our way up and behind here next. As we make our way under here, there's going to be 2 mounting points for our ABS wire. You'll find that you have a small circular port here. That's for the first mounting point. It's just going to line up and slide right in. There we are. The next mounting point is going to be right up along the top. Obviously, from under here, it's fairly difficult to see. Generally, you can just feel around. You're going to find another circular port, line it up, and press that in. Let's get this connected. Press it in, listen for a click, double check to make sure it's secured so you do not get an ABS wheel speed sensor light. It's time for the axle nut. We'll start with our washer. Start on this axle nut. I'm going to use a pry bar. We'll come across the studs down towards the ground at an angle. That's going to prevent this from turning on us. Now when we tighten this axle nut, we have to do it by hand. You don't want to use an impact tool, which could cause damage to the bearing. We'll snug this up and then we'll torque it. I have it bottomed out, so I'm going to torque this to 188 foot-pounds. Once you have that axle nut torqued to specification, it's time for the protective cover. We'll tap this in place using a rubber mallet. Double check to make sure it's sealed all the way around. Now, one last quick inspection in this area, and we can reinstall our wheel. Now it's time to reinstall that wheel. Once you have the wheel in place, start on all 8 of your 22mm lug nuts. We're going to lightly bottom them out. We'll get the wheel safely back down on the ground and then torque each of them to 140 foot-pounds. Now I've got the wheel back on the ground. Let's go ahead and torque each of these lug nuts to 140 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued. If you have a center cover, install that now. We'll get this in place. We're using our 22mm socket to lightly bottom these out. Double check to make sure it's secured in place. Okay, friend, we finished our installation. Now the next thing you want to do is take your vehicle for a road test. Make sure you have no ABS light and get yourself a 4-wheel alignment. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.